Hey guys, thanks for joining me for an episode of Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and today we're going to take a look at Overlords of Infamy. This is a newer game by Org Games. It is a 1 to 5 player game that takes roughly 45 minutes to an hour and a half to play, and it is a competitive game, so that means that everybody is working against the other players to get the most points to be the overall winner at the end of the game. So in the game itself, each player is playing an evil overlord that is trying to gather resources, play tiles, move around their lackeys, to be able to complete the nefarious plot that they're working on and continue to bring misery to the world. The player that is able to do this the most efficiently is going to be the overall winner at the end of the game. Now, players are able to also perform acts of espionage and sabotage and all kinds of other things to thwart the other players. Some of the nefarious plot cards will have all kinds of different potentially abilities. There's also going to be world events that are going to be triggered, which will also trigger the end of the game based on the number that you selected to play in your game. So my opinions of this game, I've had a lot of fun with this one. I think it's a great game, very easy to teach. There's not a lot of complicated rules. You also get a really great quick reference guide that each player will have, so you can always check that. And it's a pretty straightforward game and just a lot of fun. Each of the nefarious plots are very tongue-in-cheek. There's all kinds of crazy, zany, weird things that the overlords are going to be able to do with those throughout the game. And each one of those is just fun to read and go through with the other players as you work to create misery throughout the world. And like I said, it's a very fast game. It's a lot of fun to play. And I would definitely recommend it, especially if these are your type of games that you're interested in. And as always, if you guys enjoy these videos, if you like what I do, please consider hitting that like button, subscribing to my channel so I can continue to grow and bring these great videos to you guys. And if you want to get notifications anytime that I release new content, also consider ringing that bell, and that way you'll stay up to date on all the videos that I put out throughout the year. So let's go ahead and head to the table, and I'll teach you guys how to play. There are 4 main decks of cards the players are going to be using throughout the game. These first 3 are plot decks that the players will have access to throughout the game, and as the players gain Infamy, they'll have access to the higher level plot decks. So initially the players will only have access to the Knivery plot deck, and then as they gain Infamy, they'll have access to the Villainy, and then finally the Domination deck. And at the top of each of these cards is going to be a name of that card, and then some of the cards will also have an aftermath effect, which after the players complete the plot on the card, then they will be able to use that aftermath effect in later turns. Then we have the fluff text for the card, the number of points that card is worth, and the resources that you need to complete that plot card. As you work your way up into the higher cards, you'll notice that they're worth more points, and they'll require more resources in order to complete them. And then, like I said, some of them will also have aftermath effects that you'll be able to use later on in the game. Then we have the World Event deck. So as the Overlord players complete different things and take different actions, they're going to increase the world threat, and then each time it reaches 10, they'll have to resolve a World Event card, which each of these cards is going to have the name at the top of the card, the text of the card, so what kind of effects it'll have, and then some flavor text at the bottom of the card. There are 10 different map tiles the players are going to be using throughout the game. 7 of these are the resource tiles, which are wood, conjure ore, spark tech, fauna, scrap, food, and water. And then there are also 3 different types of tiles. Of these 7 different resource tiles, some of them will also have walls on them, as you guys can see on this tile, which are going to stop the adventure hero from moving onto those tiles from those different sections. The walls will block his movement. He can move onto those tiles from areas that do not have walls. Then we have the pit traps, which when a adventuring hero moves onto a pit trap, he's going to be placed on his side. The next time he is going to be activated, he's simply going to stand up instead, and then the time after that, then he can go ahead and move as normal. The final different tile that you're going to run into are the multi-tiles, which are going to have a village on one part of the tile and one of the different resources on the other. And players can use both of those by placing a lackey on both spots. For the village spot, you'll add a lackey to your barracks, and for the resource spot, obviously, you'll just gain a resource of that type. And then one other thing with the resources, they are finite. There are 10 of each of the resources out there, so when those resources are depleted, the players will not be able to gain those resources again until they're added back onto the main supply. For player setup, each player is going to choose an overlord that they like to play, and each overlord's card is going to have a spot for the resources that player collects throughout the game. the Overlord's name and his affinity. Each Overlord is going to have an affinity to one of the 7 different resources. Then we have the Overlord's active plot, which is always kept face down. You're not going to reveal that to other players. And then you have a spot for his completed plots. And then each Overlord also has a special ability. On the back of the card is also going to be a brief story on the Overlord, and again, his ability that he has. As far as setup's concerned, each Overlord is also going to start with their own layer tile, which is going to have their name on the back of the tile. Each layer is going to have a village space, a resource space, which is the affinity of that particular Overlord, and the Overlord's barracks, where he's going to place his lackeys. Each player is also going to choose a color and will receive 6 meeples for his lackeys of that color and an infinity token that will mark their infinity level throughout the game. Each player is also going to be dealt 2 Knivery cards. They're going to look at those cards, choose one to be their active plot, and the other one will be returned to the deck at the bottom. There are a number of different features on the game board that I'd like to go into more detail on. First off, Zone of Influence. Each Overlord player is going to have a Zone of Influence, which is going to have a location for their layer token to be placed at the beginning of the game. And then they're going to have 13 unexploited areas that they will have as their Zone of Influence. Each player's Zone of Influence is also going to be bordered on 2 sides by the contested areas, which are the outlined areas. As the players exploit the land and place tiles, when they connect the tiles from their layer to a contested area, they will have access to those tiles to gain resources from them as they would any other tile. They will also open themselves up potentially to espionage from other players, as you guys are going to see later on in the video. In the center of the board is the Kingdom of Good. There are 6 spaces along the outside perimeter of the Kingdom of Good, which will have the relics placed at the beginning of the game. And finally, in the center space is the Adventuring Hero's stronghold. So at the beginning of the game, you can also place his meeple in the center of the Kingdom of Good. At the bottom of the game board is the World Tension Track, which at the beginning of the game, you'll place the World Tension marker on the 0 space. And as the players do different actions, they're going to move that World Tension marker up. As it lands on or passes 3, 6, or 9, the following player to go will also activate the Adventuring Hero. And when the World Tension marker reaches 10, the players will resolve a World Event card. At the top of the board is the Infamy Track. As the players complete plots, they're going to move their markers up the Infamy Track, and as they move them up, they'll have access to higher and higher plots, which are worth more points and are also more difficult to complete, as you'll see later in the game. Moving over to board setup, the first thing you're going to do is determine the side of the board you're using. With a 2, 4, or 5 player game, you're going to use the square side with the 4 influence points. And if you're playing a 1 or 3 player game, you'll use the reverse side, as you guys can see here, which has the 3 different influence points. From there, then, you're going to go ahead and set out and shuffle up each one of the plot decks and the world event deck. Go ahead and shuffle up the map tiles, and you can place those out in their 4 different sections, or depending upon the number of players, you can place them in different sections. With me playing a 2-player game, I'm just going to use those 2 sides over there. You can also place out all of the different tokens you're going to be using for the game, and I'm going to go ahead and use my custom Crystal Fortress trays to hold those, and you guys can find the link to at the bottom in the description for those as well. From there, you can also place out the Wandering Adventurer die and the World Tension marker on the 0 space. In the center of the board, you can also place out the 6 relics and the Adventuring Hero in the very center. Finally, then the players are going to choose the overlords that they'd like to play as. They'll receive their layers, and then we can go ahead and place those out. With me setting up a 2-player game, our players will play adjacent to each other, so our other player will play on this side, and this side of the board will not be used for this game. Each player is also going to place out their 3 lackeys and their token in the Infamy marker 1 space. So our other player over here will also place out his layer and 3 lackeys in the barracks and his marker on the Infamy Track. Each player is also going to receive a turn reference guide, which is going to list all their different actions they can perform during their turn, and the espionage actions, which I'm going to go into more depth about those later. You can also place out the espionage tokens off to the side somewhere. And then finally, you're going to have one player be the starting player, and you can decide that in any manner you want. You can go ahead and shuffle up their tokens and have one player draw them out, and that can be the starting player if you want to do it that way. Finally, each player is going to be dealt 2 Knivery plot cards, and they will take a look at those plot cards and choose one to be their active plot. The other one will be returned to the bottom of the deck. And for this game, I'm going to go ahead and have the Menace of Metal be our starting player. From here, we're ready to begin the game. Overlords of Infamy is played over a set number of rounds based on the number of players, and at the end of the final rounds, the player with the most misery points will be the winner. So depending upon the number of players, as you guys can see on this chart here, you're going to have a number of world events that will happen or trigger. Now for a longer or shorter game, you can extend this number, but once that number of world event cards has been revealed and resolved, then the game will end at the end of that round. During each player or overlord's turn, as they are referred to in the game, they will have 3 action points that they must spend before ending their turn. Any action can be used multiple times unless otherwise stated. And I'm going to take you guys through each of the different actions, which are broken down into 2 different types. There are common actions and special actions. And I'm going to take a closer look at each one of these, and then I'll take you guys through a turn so you can see how it works in action. Each player's turn is broken into 4 different phases: the Hero Phase, Action Phase, Espionage Phase, and finally the End Phase. I'm going to take you guys through each one of these phases now. So the first phase in each player's turn is the Hero Phase. At the start of your turn, you're going to first determine whether the World Tension Tracker has landed on or past 3, 6, or 9. If yes, then you're going to roll the die, and then you get to move the adventuring hero that number of spaces in any direction that you choose. If no, then you're going to move on to the next step. The second step in a player's turn is the Action Phase. During the Action Phase, the player is going to receive 3 action points that they must spend before ending their turn. An action can be used multiple times per turn unless otherwise stated. And there's a number of different actions the players can perform from the list. There are common actions and special actions, and I'm going to take you guys through each one so you guys can see how it works and how many action points it costs. First, I'm going to go ahead and start with the common actions. So the first one is to harvest the resource. This is going to cost 1 action point, and in order to harvest the resource, you're going to place one of your lackeys that is currently in your barracks on an unoccupied resource space on the map within your zone of influence, or in a contested area that is connected to your lair by tiles that you've already placed within your zone of influence. So let me take you guys through this. So first off, you're going to take one of your lackeys that is currently in your barracks and place it on a resource space that is not currently occupied by one of your lackeys. So that one is going to gain us 1 food that we're going to place in our resource section. Now in later actions, you cannot place another lackey there because there's already one there, and you can only have 1 lackey per resource tile. Now as you add different map tiles, you'll have more areas that you can place your lackeys to gain resources. Finally, each time you gain a resource, you're also going to move the world tension marker up 1 point. Recruiting a lackey is going to cost you 1 action point. In order to do this, you're going to place a lackey onto a village and then add a new lackey from your lackey pool to the barracks. So again, we're going to take one of our lackeys from our barracks and then place them on an open village tile. From there, then we're going to take one of those lackeys from our pool and place it into our barracks, giving us more lackeys to work with. Now there's a couple other important things I want to cover with lackeys real quick. So a lackey can only be placed on tiles that are continuously connected to your lair or another tile that is also connected to your lair. So as you exploit the land and add new tiles to your zone of influence, you'll be able to place lackeys out there. But for whatever reason, if a tile is out there and it is not connected to your lair in any way, then you cannot place lackeys on there until it's connected again. So again, if we had a tile like this, then we could place lackeys on any of those. The other important thing is that map tiles that contain multiple areas, such as villages and or resources, can be used multiple times, but you can only place a lackey on each of those sections 1 time to gain that benefit. So for example, with this one, we can place a lackey up top here to gain another lackey to our barracks, and then we can place a lackey down here to gain a resource, but we cannot place another one up here to gain another lackey. Now each time you gain a lackey, As well, you're also going to move that world tension marker up 1 space. Recall Lackey for 1 action point, or you can choose to recall all of your Lackeys for 3 action points. In order to do this, you're going to remove one of your Lackeys from a map tile on the board and place it in your layer's barracks. Lackeys must be recalled back to your barracks before they can be reassigned to harvest another resource or recruit a Lackey. You may instead choose to spend 3 action points to recall all of your Lackeys from the board, regardless of how many are outside of the barracks. You may not use the Recall Lackeys option if you previously moved a Lackey from your barracks onto the map this turn. Also note, you may not recruit a Lackey on the same turn that it was sent to harvest a resource, recruit a Lackey, or steal a relic. However, any other game effect that allows an Overlord to recall a Lackey to their barracks will still work. So let me show you guys an example of this. Now, during our turn, we already placed a Lackey to gain a resource, so we couldn't choose to do this turn. But in the next turn, we can choose to recall this Lackey back to our barracks so that we can redeploy him to gain another resource or Lackey. Exploit the land is going to cost 1 action point. In order to do this, you're going to draw the top 2 map tiles from any stack. You'll go ahead and look at those and choose one that you want to build. The other one can be returned to the bottom of that stack. From there, then you're going to place the tile that you've selected within your zone of influence next to your layer or to a space that is connected to your layer by other tiles. So for example, this being our first one, we can place it here or in any one of these that would be touching the layer space. Now, if an Overlord has filled up all of his exploited or his map tiles within his zone of influence, he cannot choose to exploit the land as an action. He cannot choose to replace a tile that is already down by using this action. And if a tile becomes isolated from the string of tiles connected to the layer, the Overlord cannot harvest, recruit, or recall Lackeys from those tiles until they are reconnected to his layer space. There are also a couple of plot-related actions. The first is to complete a plot, which costs 0 action points, and an Overlord's plot can be completed during their action phase on their own turn. If you have all the applicable Lackeys in your barracks, resources, and relics that are required for your plot, you can choose to complete it. In order to do this, let's go ahead and look at an example. With our player here, the plot that we have, it requires 1 water and 2 wood, so we're going to need to gain another wood. So as our first action during our turn, we'll go ahead and place a Lackey in the woods and gain a wood resource. From there, then we're going to go ahead and announce that we're going to complete a plot. So we'll flip it over and read it. So this says that to increase the humidity in the surrounding areas. And then we can choose to read the aftermath if we want, if there is one as well. Then we're going to discard the resources that are required for this plot. So it's 1 water and 2 wood. We'll move this over to the completed plots section. And we will increase the infamy level of our character by 1 point. So we'll move it up to level 2. We're also going to increase the world tension track by a number of points equal to the plot that we completed. So with a knivery plot, it's 1 point on the track. With a villainy plot, it would be 2 points, and a domination requires 3 points on the tension track. Now, one important note, if completing a plot requires any number of Lackeys, they must come from your layer's barracks. And if this would cause you to end with less than 1 Lackey on the board, then you cannot complete this plot. Immediately after finishing a plot, you're going to go ahead and choose a new plot. You're going to take 2 cards from one of the decks of your choice based on your infamy level. So with us being level 2, we still have to take from knivery. But at level 3 and 4, we could take from villainy or knivery. And level 5, we could take from any of the 3. So in order to do this, we'll draw the top 2 cards of the deck. We'll look at them and choose one of them to be our next active plot. The other one will be returned to the bottom of that deck. The other plot-related action is to start from scratch. This also costs 0 action points. And if an Overlord does not wish to continue their current nefarious plot, they can place it at the bottom of the corresponding stack and lower their infamy level by 1. From there, then they're going to choose 2 new cards from any stack that they qualify to take from, based on their infamy level, and then again choose one of those cards to be their active plot and return to the other to the bottom of the stack. This can be done once per turn and can be done at infamy level 1 without reducing that level, as you can never go below infamy level 1. There are also 4 special actions that I'm going to take a look at. So the first one is to steal a relic. This is going to cost you 2 action points. And if you have exploited the land next to any Kingdom of Good space, you may place one of your lackeys currently in your barracks on an unoccupied relic space within the Kingdom of Good, so any of the 6 spaces. From there, then you're going to gain the token of the corresponding relic. You can only have one relic at any time, regardless of the type. And only one of each individual type of relic can be harvested at a time among all the overlords. So there's only one type of each of the relics, so once it is gone and held by another overlord, you cannot gain that one. And if at any time an overlord who currently possesses a relic chooses to steal a relic action, they must replace their current relic with the newly chosen relic. So let's look at an example of this. Let's go ahead and say that our player here had exploited the land a couple more times during their turns and had gotten one next to the Kingdom of Good here. So this is the Kingdom of Good, so we are next to it now. So as an action, we can spend 2 action points to take one of our lackeys from the barracks and place it in any one of these 6 spaces. Once we do, then we will gain that relic of that space that'll be placed in our resource section. Raiding the hero's treasure costs 2 action points. And again, if you've exploited the lands adjacent to the Kingdom of Good and the hero is not currently in the hero's stronghold, you can choose to spend 2 actions and discard 1 lackey from your barracks to take resource tokens currently on the stronghold. You can take a number of resources up to your current Infamy level, and you will have to move the World Tension Tracker 3 spaces. So let's look at an example of this. Throughout the game, the adventuring hero is going to move around the board collecting resources that will be placed back in his stronghold. So when he is outside of his stronghold, if our overlord is exploited the lands up to the Kingdom of Good, he can choose to discard one of his lackeys and take a number of resources that are here based on his Infamy level. So with us being level 2, if there was up to 2 resources here, we could take those and place those in our resource section. Then again, we would have to increase the World Tension Tracker by 3 points for doing that. Activate a plot aftermath is going to cost you 0 action points. And if you've completed a plot that has an aftermath text, you can activate this aftermath once per game unless the aftermath states otherwise. And simply follow the instructions of the aftermath, then place it face down on the bottom of your completed plots pile. The final type of special action is to sweep for infiltrators. This is going to cost 1 action point. And in order to do this, you're going to remove from the board all lackeys currently in your zone of influence that do not belong to you. You're going to place them back in their owner's lackey pool. And there's one important note with this. An overlord can never take an action that would result in them having fewer than 1 lackey, and any other overlord's action or game effect that would reduce an overlord's to fewer than 1 instead reduces it to 1, and the lackey is placed back in the overlord's barracks. The World Event Tracker drives the hero's movement and culminates in revealing a World Event card. The tracker will move 1 space each time a lackey is placed on the map to harvest or recruit, 2 spaces each time an overlord steals a relic, and 3 spaces each time the overlord raids the hero's treasure. Completing a nefarious plot is also going to raise it 1 point for knavery, 2 points for villainy, and 3 points for domination. During the first phase of each overlord's turn, known as the hero phase, you're going to determine if the tracker has landed on or passed 3, 6, or 9 during the previous overlord's turn. If so, the current overlord is going to roll a die and may move the hero a number of spaces up to the rolled minimum of 1 space. Regardless of how many of these numbers are passed in a turn, the hero still only moves once at the beginning of the next turn. So let's look at an example of this. Our red player here has moved the track up to 3. So when it's our blue player's turn to activate, the first thing he's going to do is check this track, and it did land on 3. So he's going to go ahead and roll this, and he can move the hero now up to 4 spaces, anywhere he wants to. So he's going to go ahead and move into the overlord's area. And I'm going to cover exactly what this does and how the adventuring hero works and what spaces he lands on a little bit later. So with the adventuring hero, as I talked about earlier, he's going to move around the board, and depending upon the spaces that he stops on, there's going to be different effects. So the first type are the empty contested area spaces or empty tile spaces that do not have exploited land tiles on them. So if the adventuring hero stops on one of these spaces, the adventuring hero is not going to be returned to the strongholds, and overlords cannot exploit the lands or place a tile on this map space. And overlords may not choose any action that would cause a lackey to be placed on that space as well. If the Avenging Hero lands on a map tile or contested area that contains a Lackey, all Lackeys currently on the tile or contested area are going to be removed from the board and returned to the Lackey pool of that player. Then you're going to place a basic resource shown on that tile along with the Avenging Hero meeple into the Avenging Hero's stronghold. The Avenging Hero cannot take any relics or Lackeys to the Avenging Hero's stronghold as they are not considered basic resources. So as you guys saw earlier, when the other player moved the Avenging Hero to this tile, in this situation, the red player would lose this Lackey back to his Lackey pool, and the Avenging Hero would return to the stronghold with a wood resource. Now, if an Avenging Hero enters an Overlord's lair, any one of the tile spaces that are part of the Overlord's lair, that Overlord is going to place half of his rounded down of their basic resources into the Avenging Hero's strongholds. If the Overlord had a relic, the relic is going to be returned to the general supply, and then the Avenging Hero is also going to be returned to the strongholds. So in this situation here, if the Avenging Hero had landed here, he would return half of his resources rounded down, so he only has one right now, but he would have to return his basic relic back to its space. And finally, if the Avenging Hero lands on a map tile that does not contain a Lackey, the active Overlord places a basic resource shown on the tile and the Avenging Hero's meeple into the Avenging Hero's stronghold. The tile is then liberated, meaning that it is discarded and placed at the bottom of the map tile stack. This action cannot be chosen if the Avenging Hero ends its movement in a contested area. So again, if this, let's say for example that our Avenging Hero had landed in this space here, then we would place one energy in the Avenging Hero's strongholds and return him as well, and then this tile would be liberated and returned to the bottom of the map stack. The third phase in an Overlord's turn is the Espionage Phase. During this phase, the Overlord has the option of committing an act of espionage, which allows them to perform a special action against another Overlord. Now, you have to meet a couple of conditions. First, you may only commit an act of espionage against an Overlord if both of you have exploited lands adjacent to at least one contested zone on the map space that is along a shared border of their zones of influence. If an Overlord has exploited the land adjacent to any Kingdom of Good space, they may commit an act of espionage against another Overlord who has exploited the land adjacent to any Kingdom of Good space as well. So as you guys can see here, we have our first player here. He has exploited the land against a contested zone and against the Kingdom of Good, where our other player here has contested zone, but not on the border, but is also connected to the Kingdom of Good. So these two players are able to commit acts of espionage against each other. There are 5 levels of espionage that are going to directly correspond to the Infamy Track and where the Overlords are on it. So as the Overlords move up, they'll be able to commit higher levels of espionage. I'm going to take you through each one of the levels now so you guys can see how this works. Level 1 is Glean Intel. You must have at least one Lackey in your barracks, and you will not discard this Lackey due to an act of espionage. You may view the active nefarious plot of an Overlord that you can legally target, and you may neither show this plot to other players nor tell them what you see. Level 2 is Infiltrates. This one will allow you to place a Lackey on an unoccupied space on an opposing Overlord's map tile. You're going to take one of the corresponding resources from the supply, and if you've placed your Lackey on a village, you instead get to add a Lackey from your Lackey pool to your barracks. Now, the opposing Overlord may not place a Lackey in the same space as yours, and you may recall your Lackey as per the normal rules. The Infiltration Act of Espionage does not advance the World Tension marker. So let's look at an example of this. With our red player here, he is at level 2, so he could commit an Infiltrate action. So he could take one of his Lackeys and place it in one of the opposing player's areas. So with that one, he would gain a water resource, and now our player over here cannot place a Lackey there because you can only have one in each of the tiles. Level 3 is Plunder Resources. With this one, you will discard a Lackey from your barracks, and then you're going to choose an opposing Overlord to roll the die. On a roll of a 1 or 2, your Plunder Resource action fails and nothing happens. On a 3, you may take a single basic resource from that Overlord, and on a 4, you may take 2 basic resources, or you may instead take a relic from that Overlord. Now, alternatively, you may choose to plunder resources from the adventuring hero's headquarters. This action follows the same rules as above. However, in the case of rolling a 4, you may take 3 basic resources from the adventuring hero's headquarters, and you may not choose to steal a relic in this way. Level 4 is Sabotage. With this one, you're going to discard a Lackey from your barracks, and then you're going to place one of the black Sabotage tokens on another Overlord's active nefarious plot. There may not be more than 2 of these Sabotage tokens on any one nefarious plot, and if an Overlord completes a nefarious plot with a Sabotage token on the card, they must first roll the die once per token, and if they roll a 1, then the nefarious plot is going to fail. Now, a failed nefarious plot is placed at the bottom of its corresponding deck, and the Sabotage Overlord is going to choose and discard 2 of the basic resources or a relic required to complete the plot. The Sabotage Overlord receives no mercy points for completing the failed nefarious plot and does not increase their infamy level. Immediately after discarding the chosen basic resources or the applicable relic, you're going to go ahead and choose a new plot from the applicable level as normal. Finally, level 5 is Assassinates. You're going to place your Lackey on an occupied space of an opposing Overlord's map tile. The opposing Overlord discards the Lackey from that space, and you're going to take one of the corresponding resources from the supply. If you've placed your Lackey on a village, instead add a Lackey from your Lackey pool to your barracks. That opposing Overlord may not place a Lackey in the same space as your Lackey, and you may recall your Lackey as per the normal rules. The Assassinates act of espionage does not advance the world tension track. So if we look at an example of this, neither one of our players are high enough on the Infamy track yet to perform this. But let's go ahead and say, for example, that Blue was. And so he could take one of his Lackeys and place it in an area that already has one of ours, basically killing our Lackey and returning him to the pool. And then he would immediately gain a resource of that area. So he would gain a water resource that he could add to his area. A couple other important things to note with the acts of espionage. With Assassinates and some of the other ones, you can never place your Lackeys in another player's lair. That is the only spots you cannot usually place. And depending on your Infamy level, you can always choose to go lower on the active espionage. So for example, with our red player, he could choose a level 2 or a level 1. And with the blue player, he could only choose a level 1. But as our players work up, they can also choose lower levels, and it won't affect them. It's just choosing which act they would like to do for that turn. And again, this is an optional thing. Even if our players are able to commit acts of espionage, they don't have to. It's not required. This is something that they choose to do. The end of the game is going to be determined by the number of world event cards that you guys chose at the beginning of the game, or based on the number of players. And again, you can adjust this for a shorter game by having less world event cards or more world event cards if you want a longer game. So once the final world event card has been flipped over, you're going to resolve its effects as normal, and then you're going to finish the current turn as normal as well. Then all Overlords will have one final turn after this, each to play as normal. So once you finish the turn that the world event card is triggered on, you'll go one more turn with all the players, and then after that, then you're going to total up and determine the final score. First, you're going to count up all the misery points on each of your nefarious plots that you've completed, listed it right here, and then you're going to get bonus points. You'll get 1 point for each Lackey that you have on the map or barracks, not in your Lackey pool. You'll get half a point for each resource you currently have, and you'll receive 2 points for a relic that you have. Now, the Overlord that has the most misery points is going to be the winner, and if there is a tie, there is a couple of ways to break the tie. Either the player that is the highest on the Infamy track, or if both players are tied again, then you can roll a die, and the player that rolls the highest will be the overall winner of the game. Well, I hope you guys found this video helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. And as always, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch my video and to leave me feedback on them. I do really appreciate it, and I do try to take into account everything that you guys say to make the best possible videos. And as always, if you guys want to stay connected, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Hit that notification button so you guys get notifications anytime new videos are uploaded. Connect with me on Facebook or Twitter and let me know what you guys are playing or doing. And if there's anything else you guys would like me to cover, always up to hearing from you guys or starting a conversation about stuff. So until next time, I'll see you guys later.